Hello, Jay Smith here in Spain of all places. As you can see, the Mediterranean Sea behind me. We're going to continue this theme about Muhammad. In the last video we talked about the biography of Muhammad, whether or not that biography is historical, whether or not we can trust it or not. That's a historical question. We're going to lay that to a side. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move in to the criteria of what a prophet is. As a Christian, I have to know and I have to be able to test people who come forward and say that they're prophets. Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, was he a prophet? Sung Young Moon, who is in Korea, is he a prophet? Charles Taze Russell, who was the creator of Jehovah's Witnesses, could he be claimed as a prophet? And of course, Muhammad, the man who was born in 570, started receiving these revelations in 610, so we're told, and then died in 632, so we're told. Could he be a prophet? Could he be a great prophet? According to Islam, was he the greatest of all prophets, the seal of all prophets in the line of prophets? Now, as a Christian, I need to come up to an answer, and I have to be able to convince Muslims that I have an answer, and the answer I go to is my Bible. When I go back to the Bible is very specific that there are certain criteria that all prophets must follow. And there are 4 basic criteria that every prophet must follow to be in that prophetic line, to have the office of prophethood. And the first one that we look at is that he must be in the prophetic race. We see that in Genesis chapter 17. We see that in Genesis 22 when Abraham came to God and asked him, I have 2 sons, I have Ishmael, I have Isaac. What about Ishmael? What's going to happen to Ishmael? And God says to him right there in verse 20 and 21 that I will bless Ishmael. He'll have 12 sons, and they will be the heads of 12 nations, and people will multiply from them. But my covenant, God says to Abraham, my covenant is with Isaac. And it's that covenantal line that we're looking at. It's that covenantal line that was then referred to again in Genesis 22 when God goes to Abraham, and 3 times in chapter 22 he says to Abraham, bring your one and unique son. 3 times he specifies that that one and unique son is Isaac, not Ishmael, but Isaac. Knowing at that time that Abraham had 2 sons, obviously God meant here that as far as he was concerned, Abraham only had 1 son, and that's the son that he gave him. So it's from that line that the prophets have to fall. And we ask, of course, did Muhammad come in that line? And the answer is obviously no, he did not come in that line. He was in the line of Ishmael. Muslims tell us that. We accept it. We're not going to quibble about that. But obviously the Bible is very specific. That's the wrong line. In Surah 29, Ayah 27, it stipulates that from this line, Ibrahim, Isaac, Isaac, and Jacob, it is in that line that you will find prophethood. So even the Quran seemed to suggest that that line of prophethood comes in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Muhammad comes in the wrong line. Strike 1. Secondly, we know that the revelation, that which is given to the prophet, must correspond with that which has come before. Now, when you look at the Old Testament, when you look at all the prophets of the Old Testament, Abraham, Moses, of course, Moses we know quite a bit about because he not only writes about himself, but also writes a good bit about Abraham leading up to his time. And when you look and see what they said, they are all waiting for the Messiah. They're pointing to the coming of the Messiah. They specifically talk about the Messiah. Other prophets that come after do so. Isaiah, Elijah, they're all waiting for this Messiah to come in that prophetic line. And more specifically, the Messiah will come as a suffering servant. We see that in Isaiah 53. We also see that in Isaiah 69. We see that in Psalm 22. But what's more interesting is when you come to Jesus, he fulfills almost all of those prophecies. There's a good 300 prophecies that he fulfills, all of which prophesied where he would be born in Micah 5:2, there in Bethlehem, how he would die between 2 robbers. We see that he would then be buried in a rich man's tomb. And if you look at all of these prophecies that are fulfilled in Jesus Christ, now Muslims tell us that 600 years later, a new prophet was to come, the greatest of all prophets, and he would share in that prophetic line. But when you look and see what he was given in the Quran, you will see that there are contradictions after contradictions in the Quran with the previous scriptures. One of them we've just mentioned, and that is, who was it that Abraham was supposed to sacrifice? Was it Ishmael or is Isaac? The vast majority of Muslim scholars believe it was Ishmael that Isaac was going to sacrifice. We know that that was Isaac. There's a contradiction, but the real contradictions that we have between Muhammad and that which has come before concern the person of Jesus Christ. What we see in the Quran is that Jesus did not die on the cross. In the Bible, it's very specific. He did die. We've already talked about this on a video. Surah 4:157 says, another was given his image. In other words, another was put on the cross. Another, therefore, took his place. That contradicts not only the Gospels, it contradicts what all the Old Testament prophets were setting up to believe, pointing to that fact that he would come as a suffering servant. And, of course, fulfilling what we see in Genesis 3, verse 15, where somebody was going to come in the line of Eve and crush the head of Satan. There's the first prophecy fulfilled in the cross of Jesus Christ. So you've got a problem here. How can a prophet then come 600 years later after Christ and contradict what all the other prophets have been saying, but also contradict what Jesus Christ said? A prophet does not contradict that which God has given earlier. Strike two. Thirdly, a prophet must prove that he's a prophet by doing something, a miracle, or that he must do a prophecy. Now, Muslims will contend that certainly Muhammad did prophesy. I'm just going to read some references here in Surah 30, ayah 1 to 4. Muhammad mentions that the Sassanids, who are the Persians, were going to defeat the Byzantines. And so you see, this was supposedly revealed in 615. We do know that the Sassanids did defeat the Byzantines in 628. And according to the Quran, it says in a few years. Does that qualify him as a prophet? Because we can't find any other prophecy anywhere else. Well, you might say it. He got it right. I mean, there was only a 50-50 chance. Those are great odds. I'd like to go to Las Vegas with those kind of odds. I don't gamble, but certainly anybody who did would understand that that is not a quality. That does not qualify him to be a prophet. For that matter, anybody that would say, I will defeat the enemy in a coming war would be prophetic. What miracle did he do? And I've asked many Muslims, where is that miracle that Muhammad did? Can you know where that miracle? In fact, he was questioned this in Surah 17, ayah 90 to 93. The Jews questioned him, where is this miracle that you're going to do to prove that you're a prophet? And you'll see the response in Surah 2, Surah 6, Surah 1, 13, Surah 17, and also Surah 54, where Muhammad comes back and says, I am nothing but a warner. And he actually stipulates that he cannot do any miracles. And in fact, he gives the excuse that the prophets before did miracles. You didn't believe them, so why should I do a miracle? You won't believe me. Not much of a defense. So certainly we don't know that Muhammad did any miracle. He doesn't claim to do a miracle. In Surah 54, ayah 1, it does talk about the splitting of the moon, which Muslims point to as the one miracle Muhammad did. Now I scratch my head and I say, hold on a minute. If Muhammad had split the moon, according to that verse, he then brought the two halves of the moon on either side of a mountain, that would have had a huge effect on the Earth's atmosphere. Certainly somebody would have seen it. Half the population of the world would have noticed it. It would have been written up somewhere in the books. We don't know any reference of any moon being brought down on either side of the Earth. It had a huge effect on the Earth's gravitational pull. But obviously today, Muslims no longer are saying that Muhammad had done that, certainly not in the 7th century. Now, the last one, and that's the one that really is characters, because now, strike 3, we want to go to strike 4. Did Muhammad know God's personal name? And that's the real criteria. Who was it that Muhammad was sending? For whom was he being a prophet? What's the name of that God? Now, we've talked about this in quite a few videos, and it's fascinating to see the responses from many Muslims. The difficulty for Muslims is they cannot find that name that was given to Moses there in Exodus 3:14, the name that we see right through the Old Testament, 6,823 times, that name that is the personal name for God, that specific name, the name that, of course, that we need to find, because it's that name that qualifies any prophet for speaking for that God, and it's that name that we want to see in the lips of the prophet himself, Muhammad. We don't find that name there, and that name is Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, the personal name for God. That name that stipulates that it's different from Elohim, different from Adonai, that's the name we're looking for. Muhammad never speaks it. You won't find it in the Quran. You won't find it in the traditions. You won't find it in his biography. You won't find it in any of his sayings, which disqualifies him from being a prophet. So he does not come in the prophetic line. He did know prophecy. He did nothing to prove he was a prophet. That's what he said. Does not correspond with that which has come before, and he doesn't even know God's personal name. Strike 4, you're out. So, we're asking Muslims again, prove to us, convince us that he's a prophet. Right now, I can't find anything that convinces me. I'm waiting for you to give me and convince me. And that's why we need to have this debate. We need to really be asking this question, because we're not convinced he's a prophet. You want to find a prophet, come back to the Bible, come on home to the Bible and see the prophets there, and then look at the line that God gave, not only to Abraham, right through Moses, but the one that we see fulfilled in Jesus Christ. I leave it there, and we'll get back to you on more as we continue with this question concerning Muhammad.